Hey, Being at Work listeners, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Andrea Butcher. You know, there is a moment many leaders reach on their journey after they have done the work, embraced vulnerability, maybe even changed the way they lead, where something unexpected happens. They feel more, they notice more, care more, are affected more. And instead of feeling like growth, that can feel hard and burdensome. And that's the problem that we are solving today. Dennis Martin was on the show 6 years ago, and that conversation was all about vulnerability, what it means and why leaders resist it. But today we're asking a different question. What happens after you have chosen to be vulnerable? What does vulnerability look like, not as a concept, but as a daily practice? Dennis has continued to do the work and to grow as an executive. And he's been honest about the tension that comes with it. And I'm so grateful for that. His words, I wish I didn't care so much. This conversation is for every leader who gets vulnerability intellectually, but is quietly wrestling with what comes next. How to lead with emotional awareness without losing your edge, and how to stop trying to outgrow the parts of yourself that aren't going anywhere. Dennis doesn't have it all figured out, as none of us do, and that is exactly why this conversation matters. Dennis Martin, welcome back to the show.
Awesome, Andrea. Thank you. So great. So great to be here with you today. It's hard to believe it's been 6 years.
I know, isn't it? September of 2019, like before everything changed, pre-COVID, we were talking about choosing vulnerability. That was the title. And it was the 10th episode that I did because I launched Being at Work earlier that year. And you and I were on a board together at the time. And we were chatting over cocktails during like a connection time.
Pretty common for me.
Me too. But you may remember, like you were telling me your story and I just blurted out like, you've got to be on my leadership podcast.
Yeah, and that was probably the first podcast I'd ever done, actually, too. So it was probably the first time I'd really spent time talking about this more publicly, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's exactly why I wanted to have you back. I mean, because it has been several years. And so what has vulnerability looked like over time?
Yeah, so I think, if I think back, you got to get your way back machine out. 6 years is a long time ago, but I almost feel like these things are just like everything else. There's always a next level. And there's always a first step, and your journey never really ends when you're going through these things. But I think back to the time that you and I talked and what I had been going through. I think, choosing to embrace vulnerability at the time was about truly listening and accepting feedback, opening yourself up to feedback and accepting that perception is important, whether you intend it or not. That being vulnerable enough to just be open about how others are perceiving you, feeling you, whatever the right terminology is there, is kind of turning. I called it back in one of my posts I did on LinkedIn. Let your guard down, learning to not be defensive on some of the feedback that you get and choose to embrace it for what it can do for you, as opposed to being resistant to it. So I think that was probably the first step, which felt like a big step. But certainly over time, I've come to discover there's much more to it than that, because once you open the door, things can rush in and you have to just keep learning to grow with it, I guess would be how I would say it.
Learning to grow with it. Yeah. So what have you, through this process and continuing to be open to feedback, what have you learned about yourself?
Number one, there's always a lot more than you think there is in terms of work to do, right? In terms of unlocking what your capabilities are. I feel like in that early on, again, 6 years ago, I felt like I'm making great progress. In some ways it was small. Those were small changes that were having big impacts, but I felt like more that there's almost no ceiling in some ways. And one of the things that the frames I've picked up, I've kind of had it for a while, but in a development context, I've always thought of myself, or wanted to think of myself, as a lifelong learner. And I thought about that as, more designations and doing hard work and learning more stuff, and very academic, if you will. And I always focused on, looking at the things that I wasn't good at and saying I had to be better at those things. And two things I kind of discovered through this is, number one, When you're trying to focus and be something you're not good at or something you're not who you are, that's not really going to work for you because you can't be something that you're not or someone that you're not. You can only be more of who you are and driven by what you believe. And so for me, that was this discovery of it's not trying to be someone else or something else. It's trying to really look inside and be more of who I am as part of that process. So I think vulnerability kind of taught being vulnerable to start with kind of taught me that. But the challenge was once it starts to pour in, you have to really do the work because really being vulnerable, it kind of opens up, you let your guard down, and all of a sudden there's more work to do because you have to, it starts with letting other people give you feedback and accepting it, but ultimately there's a mirror that is part of the equation. And really looking in the mirror for yourself and trying to discover what that is I think maybe the hardest part of some of this because I have, no one else knows what we're capable of, Andrea, only we do. Right. And so thinking through that and declaring it can really be challenging because it's the one person who really thinks that you have the most potential you've never really said out loud. Right. So that's part of this growth process is you expose yourself to lots of things, but one of them is failure, which is really a fear that many of us carry implicitly or explicitly all the time.
So I want to go back to the point that you made about you can't be someone that you're not. So what I hear in that is accepting what is not going to change. How do you discern between, okay, I've gotten feedback, this is a growth point for me, versus those things like, yeah, this is just who I am?
Right.
Do you get the tension that I'm describing there?
I do. I think that, the last part of what you said, it's just who I am. That can actually be a defense mechanism, right? Right. You have to,
that's a pretty shitty attitude, isn't it? That's just who I am.
Yes, that's true. And people still receive it a certain way. So, I think it's been, how do I phrase it? Trying to be more of who I am is if you focus on the positive part of this, it gets to be much easier to do. And in fact, if that's what you're focused on, being more of who you are, you don't even really look at the other. And I think you learn to adapt around it, right? So rather than focusing on what you don't do or what you're not, and I think it's dangerous to always say, well, that's just who I am. Because I feel that's the point at which you're kind of, at least in spirit, rejecting kind of this need to keep growing. And so you have to be thoughtful about it because I think there is a need at times to protect yourself from putting too much pressure on yourself. But at the same time, if you want to truly keep growing, you have to just keep opening up a little bit at a time on some of those things.
You got it. And if someone's giving you feedback about something, like it's not about you. It is about how they received it. And that's the thing to focus on.
Yeah. So I think that's framing. I did a lot of work between the first time that we talked and now, but probably starting 4 or 5 years ago on emotional intelligence. And you talked in your opening a bit about, emotional awareness increases, but tools kind of lag a little bit to manage it. But the reality is awareness doesn't help without intelligence to do something about it. And so I spent a lot of time, taking up practices like mindfulness and reflecting on emotional intelligence. How do those feelings manifest in my body? Like, when are they happening to me? I've done work. I work with a personal coach. I do a lot of work in there with a feelings wheel. So how good is your vocabulary around emotion?
Look, I've got my feelings wheel behind me, Dennis.
Right. I see it, right? Like most of us can name the 6 in the middle and not the rest. And I think until you learn to expand out your vocabulary, there's a good book out there that I read. It's called Permission to Feel. It talks about this acronym, and the acronym is RULER, and it helps you, can you recognize, understand, label, express, and regulate your emotions. And so going through that process is helpful because until you have the vocabulary, and they don't teach you this stuff, at least they didn't teach them in grade school when I was going to school, right? And like I was saying, it's like math for the right brain. It isn't actually, it's different, but there is a formula and there are some building blocks that you can use to kind of grow your capabilities on the emotional intelligence side. And for me, that's been really helpful to regulate my emotions in the moments. And look, as you said, I don't have it all figured out. Just I'm human like everybody else. There are moments when we all regress, but I just found it. Once you start it, it actually has a big impact, not just in my professional life. It has had a pretty big impact in my personal life.
Well, and I want to hear about the impact in both your personal life and, I mean, you are the president of a business unit in a large organization. What is the impact of growing your emotional intelligence? Like, I feel like we all need to lean in right now.
Yeah, I'll just say the moments of me trying to be more vulnerable coincided with me getting this role, right? And so I think it's
Yeah.
been, I think that my ability to, early on, I think I even said it in the original pivot, Power of the Pivot book here. I
Yeah.
talked about the quotes of, I've always been a driver and kind of tried to get things done. But when you lead, you have to, how do you start to get things done through others? And that's through engagement and creating belief. And a big part of that is being able to connect with people emotionally. And I think of myself as a pretty natural connector. I'm a pretty social person, but there is kind of a different level, especially when you get into leadership, because I can't just be Dennis anymore, right? I try to be, but I'm also in a positional place that you have to be aware of what that impact might be on people and how they're going to relate to you. And that's kind of hard. It's sometimes hard to accept, right? But then you have to also work with it. So I have found that that's one of the reasons I keep doing the work, is because there's just a next level, and at each point I find that I need more. And I'll maybe share a moment that kind of really was a catalyst for me. I think, one of the very first LinkedIn posts I did was actually tied to something that you posted on LinkedIn, but the lead up to that was the summer of 21. And for the first couple of years in the role, I felt like things were going pretty well. And this is in leadership. When things are going well, you're not really being tested. You don't really know your skills until things start to go a little bit sideways. And I can remember in the summer of 21, of course, we're in the middle of COVID, and there were some challenges we were having in the business. And I was driving with my wife. We're on 146th Street, right near River Road. I think you probably know where that is. Like, I know exactly where I was looking at when I said this. And I just told her, I just wish I didn't care so much. And that was me kind of expressing, I don't even know why I said it. And we kind of commit. My wife and I are very much the same, we're sort of high conscientious kind of people. But it really didn't settle with me. I kind of like realized at that point that I'm never going to not care. So what am I going to do about that? And I talked to my leader, who at the time, who's still my leader, but who said, yeah, there's definitely things we can do. And I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to go into an executive development program at that time. And really it was me saying, hey, for the first time in my career, I think I need more to do more work on this. And this is really where the hard work begins for me.
So there was a willingness, like it was time.
Well, initially, I was a bit skeptical going in. I just felt like I needed it, but those kinds of things, it was like developing purpose and, kind of breaking down your core identity kind of things. And it was just one of those things where
hard work.
I'm a Gen Xer, right? Don't let your emotions get in the way. Those are all the things that we had. And so I just kind of like, my left brain was telling me not to, but I just chose to embrace it. And I got some amazing feedback from a lot of my colleagues that, again, I had to be intentional to accept. But that experience and the timing of it was sort of really important for me, because that kind of, when I talked earlier about needing to go deeper and more purpose orientation, that was what drove me to that, which I don't know if I would have done without the help of that program and the folks that I work with as part of that program.
What feedback did you get?
I don't even know if I can remember all the feedback, Andrea. It's just a lot of it more is around, again, how people are perceiving how you're showing up. I have this frame that I built there I've built for myself of, having good intent isn't the same as being intentional. And it's one thing to say, I didn't mean to. And that's true sometimes, but you did, right? And I think again, especially in leadership, when sometimes your voice is louder than you want it to be because of your position, or that you realize it is, being intentional is more and more important. I didn't mean to is great if you apologize sometimes, but it's even better if you think of being intentional in advance.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's trying to continue to learn to be more intentional and being self-aware of how those things and how I'm showing up. And that and continue just to expose the vulnerability and share more openly. The other part was, a big part of this for me was learning to lead and share the vision that I might have and the beliefs that I have. Because I'm even trying to lead people there, and you just follow me, I'm going to get you there. But people couldn't see where I was looking, and they can't help get there without that. So learning to, again, this is being vulnerable. Vulnerability sometimes is actually declaring what you believe is possible. And as a leader, that's pretty important. But it's also
can be risky.
Right? Because people look at you like, what are you talking about? How are we going to do that? Like, I don't know, but I feel like we can. So let's start. So whatever the frame is you use. And so that's been part of it. So coming out of that experience, it was a year-long experience, but the first part of it really felt like I came up with this openness, got more feedback, but also tried to really understand what was driving me in a purpose context. And so start to share things about what I might think is possible with my team, continue to be open with my team. I have a great team, both that works for me and that I work with and around me. And so it's been a great environment, I guess, to grow in that way. And then I started to share some things openly in a very public way, on LinkedIn, which has been also very, very gratifying. Like I shared with you when we were talking in advance, like when you put something into the world, it's amazing at all how much comes back to you.
Yeah, I mean, you got a lot of reaction to that.
Yes. Yeah.
Why do you think?
I think because people want more of it. Or there's some, maybe I say it this way. I don't know if anyone really cares about your story or my story, Andrea, but if they can see themselves in your story or my story, then they connect to it and then they feel better about it.
There's a me too when you
There's a
read
me
that.
too.
Yeah.
I see that and it really connected with me. And people are just looking for connections sometimes and ways to think about what they're going through because they often feel alone. These are the things that are in your own head. It's better to get them out sometimes and leave them in there. And it's good for people to see that other people are going through the same things. And it was very interesting because some of it was just very organic. I had people who I hadn't talked to since high school who dropped a note that says, "Hey, it's just good to hear your voice." Right. And so that was pretty fun. And, my brother replied to that email to that on LinkedIn in a way he probably would never talk to me in person. Right. So we had this sort of heartfelt exchange in that context. So it was interesting. I'll continue to do some of those things. And I just have found that it helps me to share and it helps others along the way. So
what is that? Like, what is the power in the sharing? Why is that so helpful?
I would say, first of all, I think part of this, if I go, my purpose that I kind of came through is really to use my skills, gifts, and abilities to help others. Mm-hmm. This motivated to help part of my ethos is in there. And so that's part of what drives me. And in some ways, I feel like I'm sharing selfishly, if that even makes sense. But I just, again, we're human. People want connection. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter what your personality type is. Everyone wants or looks at connection. So I think sharing and being vulnerable is it's an attractive quality in the sense of if you're vulnerable, I can be vulnerable. Like it is, I think, in that very basic way that I don't have to try to put on all this veneer if someone else will let theirs down. So if someone else lets their guard down, I can let my guard down. And that's really key, I think, to building relationships and trust over time. But it's not easy all the time.
It's why feelings wheels are so powerful, is because feeling wheels represent all of the things that we all feel, the human feelings.
Yeah.
So by talking about those things and sharing the story, it touches those feelings within the humans that you're sharing with. And you told me several months ago when we were talking, you said something like, it really resonated with me, and I'd love for you to talk more about this. You said previously, like earlier in my career, like I would suffer in silence. I would keep it in.
Yeah.
And so now you're recognizing that you don't have to do that. And actually, you have way more influence.
Right.
When you share what you're feeling, when you share what's going on within you.
Yeah, I think that listening with that as you're reading your intro and I don't know that depending on, again, my generation was, never let them see you sweat. Don't let your emotions get in the way. All these phrases that would stick in my head. And, emotional intelligence as a discipline wasn't even really thought of until the mid 90s. Right. So when I was a kid, they didn't have this, they didn't teach this stuff and the theory wasn't very well developed. And so I don't even know that I would have thought of it as suffering. This is what I had to do. It was just, you get used to, carrying the burden. And at some point we really realize it's on you. It's like wearing a weight jacket. You just don't even realize it's there. You just get used to carrying it until you find a way to shed it.
Is it different for men?
I don't know. I don't know. I feel like I think everyone's human. I think it could be perhaps depending on, I grew up in a sports culture and team sports culture. And so I think there was some element of it, but I think it's different for men, but not always. It's different for both men and women, and it's hard in different ways.
It's hard in different ways,
I think.
So the work is exploring what it means for you.
Yeah.
And what's getting in the way. And
yeah, I had this phrase. Maybe I'll share it here. Is that you think about these things of, I think with how you deal with these things, learn the feelings wheel, kind of understand how to regulate your emotions. as I say, if you're not training your brain, it's training you,
Mm.
right? And so no matter, so if you haven't done the work, your brain is already, whether it's protecting you, whether it's dealing with all these stories of your past, all these experiences you created, like it just continues to reinforce itself for whatever
Yeah.
purpose. Like this is ego driven kind of stuff, right? Which is, I always think of the ego as something to protect yourself with.
Yes.
Your ego is protecting you. It's not necessarily all the way everyone talks about it, but I think of it that way. And so just really kind of being thoughtful about it to open that up. So I think for me, I didn't really realize maybe the burden, how much of a burden I felt like I was carrying because I'm a hard worker. I figure things out. And my formula was always to put my head down and just work through it. And I think that summer when when I made that statement, which I would say is sort of the sentinel moment for me of I wish I didn't care so much, was when I realized
Yeah.
I can't work through this.
Yeah.
This isn't just working hard. This is fine. This is doing hard work. And there was hard work to be done. And I had to figure out what that was.
Yeah. And when you know better, you do better. I mean,
For sure.
So now, and I suspect this goes with your intentionality.
Right.
Now it's doing the work in those hard moments when you notice the armor start to go on or the ego kick in. So what are some of the things for you in the moment that you are like really intentional about? And what triggers you? Like, do you notice those? Have you identified those things that, oh, there goes the armor?
I think, for me, I'm in a business where I have grown up and I know a lot about it. And so I think sometimes I feel like I'll see where we need to go or I'll see answers before others. I may be right, I may not be right. But because I have been in it so long, I have confidence. And so I think I'm also kind of a very optimizing person, efficiency person. I check Google Maps every day before I leave work to make sure I'm taking the best route home. I'm kind of one of those people. So when I'm thinking about how to solve problems, I'm looking for what I think is the right answer and what's the fastest way there. And in a leader context, when you're doing the work yourself, that's what you can do. But in a leader context is sometimes, well, what's the best way to get all these things done and how do you navigate? So I just think catching yourself in the moment. And then I have little notes that I carry with myself, trying to find my little folder here. But I have this sort of power of inquiry thing where you listen, ask first, and sort of lead with inquiry as opposed to anything else. And again, don't always do it, but I think that's really some things that I try to do where you're listening and asking first. And again, the higher your position, the more important it is to listen first, because often when the highest ranking person in the room speaks, often the conversation ends.
Yeah.
And so no matter how good you are at inviting and being vulnerable, sometimes that's just what happens. So
it is. And I keep going back to intentionality because you've got to be paying attention to what's going on within you, don't you?
Yeah.
And literally, I've had situations where I've literally been biting my tongue. Like this is, and saying to myself, quiet.
Yeah.
Breathe. Because I know that if I respond from that ego, fear-based place, it is not going to have the intention that I want.
Yeah. Well, in that moment, when you think about regulating emotion, that emotion is about you, not the other person. But in the same way that how they feel is about them, how you feel is about you.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to just hold on a minute. That's why trying to regulate that is important, because people don't make you feel, you make you feel, and you control that. And so taking the moment to listen, and one of the things I've talked about is how do you integrate that? And this is where the book that I was talking about earlier, raising your emotional intelligence. It was one about mindfulness and to project feelings and learn where they manifest in your body. They could be different for you than they are for me. The shoulder tension or something in your gut, but whatever those things are, that's telling you something. And what is that? And why are you having it? Again, we are very quick processors sometimes, so you don't always catch it. But if you catch it before it gets too far, it's also good.
Ability and ownership in that, Dennis, is also so incredibly powerful that you say,
Sure.
How I feel is about me. I mean,
Right.
even that paradigm shift, because we hear it in language all the time. You make me so mad.
Right.
You make me feel, you make me crazy. Well,
Yeah.
what I'm doing may impact, but the feeling is within you. Owning that is huge.
Yeah. I think the other phrase, I use this both, as a leader, sometimes you want to be more assertive, and that's something I work on because I'm often very accommodating, or I feel like I am, and trying to help people and do those things. But I've learned to express assertiveness, and even in terms of needs. So I need this from you. I need that. And people, when you have good connections, will respond to that. right? Because I want to give you what you need. And it's not like a directive, it's more of a, hey, here's what I need from you. How can I help? Or what can you do? And people just have a
Right.
different reaction to the word choice on some of those things. And often expressing that will help you let go of the emotion because you've been clear. So what is the words and ways you can say things that will, that aren't, they don't become kind of escalating, but they become clear,
Mm-hmm.
right? And yeah. And by the way, I'm not the best at doing all this stuff, but I've thought a lot about it, but it's just literally how do you keep working on it? So,
Well, and I have found same. I have found that just acknowledging, hey, I'm really struggling with this,
right.
but you matter to me, and
Yeah.
our relationship matters, and so I'm hoping you'll meet me in the struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is so hard. How has this affected your relationships? Like, what would your wife say about your vulnerability journey? Is she grateful for the
You
journey?
so, so my wife and I have been together for 37 years.
Oh, so she's seen you through it all.
She's seen a lot. She knows me better than anybody. And trust me, she makes me a way better person than I am. But
Mm.
so I think that in some ways it was sort of like, what's gotten into you? Because they just started to communicate and relate things. And, I think, you know how men are. If you give me a problem, we try to solve it. And
Uh-huh.
sometimes you just wanted to share your information. You just wanted to share it with me, but I wanted to solve it. And so I started to
Yep.
share things back. And she was like, we've never talked about this before. I'm like, I'm just
Oh.
sharing. So, like, what do you do
Oh.
about it? So there was a little bit of that happened, but it was, it helped. We've had a great relationship for a long time. We're very, very similar and think the same, but it just, in whatever ways you can make it better, it got better. Right. And so there's certainly some
Mm.
things though, that where I'm just sharing openly now. She's like, we never said that before. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm just
Uh-huh.
telling you. And it was helpful for me because, the more things that you pile up, and again, as you get more leaders, hire more responsibility at work, all these things kind of pile up. So the little things start to matter.
Yeah.
If you can shed the little things, it starts to help you deal with the big things. And I really do think because little things, everything just grows if you don't deal with them. So in ways, I'm sure early on it was just sort of like, who is this guy? What is he saying? But it was good, and it's helped me in lots of other places,
I
whether it's at
bet.
work or even some of my relationships, just to be clear and to say things that are on my mind, but also being also empathetic in the moment to also make sure it's not just my perspective, but also takes into account what they might be thinking or feeling or how they're seeing it. So
Yeah. Well, as you are uncovering more of who you are and being more confident in that, of course, people are going to feel that.
yeah.
There will be a trust naturally in that. So now what? When we reconnect in a few years for like the 400th episode of this podcast, I'm curious about your continued vulnerability journey. You've referenced that this is ongoing daily work. It is a
Yeah.
leadership challenge for all of us. So what's the growth point that you're leading into now?
I think that I don't know if I could articulate where I've come in the last 6 years. And so I am always one where, I don't know if you know, there's a coach, entrepreneur coach out there named Dan Sullivan. And Dan Sullivan has a quote. This is always make your future bigger than your past. And so for me, it's just something that I kind of grab on and live by, and without thinking about it too much, in the sense of, because everything is perhaps subjective in that way, right? You have your own view of what's bigger. You can reframe what you're trying to get after. But for me, number one, don't go backwards, right? Continue to build and grow, because this work, just like every other muscle, if you don't work it, it atrophies, and you go back to where you started from. In some ways, we're all kind of primal, right? In certain ways, and so I think that let's continue to grow. That's why I think growth is a journey. It just keeps it's a lifelong thing. This year I have my word this year, so I'm a little bracelet here. It's called courage, and I think at every step requires courage, no matter how far you've come or how far you get to go or what's right in front of you. Everything. I just did a post on this on LinkedIn, and I think courage is something that we all need at every point. And it isn't that what's the saying? Bravery isn't the absence of fear, right? It's sort of the presence of courage. And so I think
Mm,
those things are just important. And so it's maybe I would just say it's to keep maintaining the courage to keep growing and to not be afraid of what might be. I don't know if you ever heard of the poem by Marianne Williamson called Our Greatest Fear.
yes. Playing small.
And I think that's right, playing small. So just try to be more of who you are, to try to be the most of who you can be. Like my frame for development, I had a presentation coach maybe a dozen years or so ago. who was actually a theater coach.
Oh, wow.
And his name is Len Mosey. His company is called Dramatic Difference. I don't even know if he's still working. Part of what he was teaching me is like stage presence and how to enunciate and clarify. And he didn't tell me his motivation for this, but he gave me this poem and said, I want you to practice reciting this to work on your enunciation and your speed and all these kinds of things. And so over a period of 3 months, I probably said this poem 150 times.
Oh, wow.
It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light and not our darkness that most frightens us. So if you can imagine the effect of just saying that out loud 150 times to yourself over and over.
Yeah.
I don't know that, back then, again, I had a pretty tough veneer on, that it wasn't easily penetrated, but it definitely helped me start to think about some of the things I'm doing now. But everything is a growth curve. So
no doubt. Well, there's so much there. Thank you for reminding me that really hits home, that one.
Yeah. I think for me, it's just continue on the path that I'm on. To continue to, I'll just say, reveal myself, maybe to myself and to others, right? But it's because, at every step, there's another step. I always say in business and in corporate world, the reward for more is more, right? There's always a next level. And I think at every level, you just start to discover what that is and how you get there. So that's why the reason I chose courage this year, because, I look at it and think, well, it's going to take a little more, some might look and say, Dennis is doing great. And I feel really good about that by many standards. At the same time, only I know what I might be capable of, right? And so the courage to keep declaring that and to push yourself forward is actually something that you do for yourself. It could be easier to meet others' expectations than it is to meet your own, because they may not know what you're capable of. So I think there's part of that to keep, and it's not meant to be in this sort of harsh context. My word last year was thrive. So I would naturally strive to do better, to work hard, all those things, but you have to balance it out. And once you sort of align it with your purpose, it doesn't become stressful or hard work. It becomes just important to you. And so, but you got to keep doing the work. And there are always off ramps that seem tempting in a certain way. But I think leadership is really about not taking the off ramps and continue to lead with the courage that's required.
So here's to courage in 2026 and beyond. Thank you, my friend. I'm grateful for you. I appreciate you showing up with your big old heart and sharing more about your journey.
Yeah.
Because I know it's not easy. So
right. Thanks, Andrea. Truly appreciate it.
Appreciate you. What a gift this episode is, to be able to reconnect with an early guest several years later to unpack their journey. What Dennis just described, the moment he said out loud, I wish I didn't care so much. That's the moment so many leaders arrive at and don't know what to do with. And what I hope you heard today is that the answer isn't to care less. It's to do the work with courage. The work of being more of who you already are. The work of trading suffering and silence for the courage to say what's actually true for you. The work of leading yourself first and then others without the armor. Maybe it's time to put it down. And that is the work we do with clients and leaders every single day at Abundant Empowerment. We create a space, a sacred space, for leaders to slow down, look in the mirror, and step more fully into who they already are. Not to fix themselves, to free themselves. If that resonates with you, we would love to have you in our community. So please come find us. AbundantEmpowerment.com. I'll put the link in the show notes. And if today's conversation moved you, please share it with a leader in your life who needs to hear it. I'm so grateful to Dennis for his courage. And thank you, listeners, for being at work.